All thoughts and opinions expressed on WRHU's Queerly Informed do not reflect the views of Hofstra University, the Board of Trustees, or Radio Hofstra University. All contrasting thoughts or suggestions can be sent to programming at WRHU.org or to Room 127 Herbert Hall, 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
Welcome to the 12th installation of Season 3 of Queerly Informed.
I'm Riley Horvath.
And I'm Bryana Neff.
And we'll have more on the latest in international, national, and local LGBTQ news.
The dating app Grindr has backed a Republican-led bill to force age verification on the app stores.
The European Union rules all member states must respect same-sex marriages, even if they're illegal in their country itself.
Russia has banned the gaming platform Roblox over its permitting of LGBT propaganda.
And more.
In queer entertainment, I'm Savaria, with more on Sarah Paulson's new Hollywood star, a gay man breaks a world record, and 2026 LGBTQ+ movie releases.
For gay history, I'm Camryn Bowden. We have more on Henry Gerber founding the first gay rights organization in the U.S. Stay tuned to find out more.
And for your Queerly Informed interview installation, a conversation between WRHU's Juliana Calção and Professor Lisa Dresner over President Trump's decision to not commemorate World AIDS Day.
Thank you for joining us today. Let's get into the headlines. The App Store Accountability Act, which would require parental approval for minors to download certain apps, as well as enforce age verification to use the App Store, has recently been backed by queer dating app Grindr. The legislation, introduced by Michigan Representative John James and Utah Senator Mike Lee, has garnered support from several major apps, with Grindr's head of governmental affairs, Joe Hack, expressing his support in a blog post. Hack wrote, quote, "Grindr is only for adults. Keeping minors off of our platform is our top priority," end quote. He later thanked both Representative James and Senator Lee for introducing the legislation to Congress and urged politicians to pass it. Age verification to access certain online platforms has been incorporated into state law in 25 states already, with certain pornography sites becoming less accessible in states across the country. Polls have shown that 4 in 5 Americans support some level of age verification in order to protect children online, while advocacy groups warn that legislation like this could become a slippery slope towards media censorship. David Swanson, campaign coordinator at rootsaction.org, publicly expressed his concerns with this trend, writing, quote, "The internet is not improved by treating its users like criminal suspects and our lives as opportunities for corporate profit. Legislators defunding education to invest in wars, police, prison, borders, and constant surveillance should think hard before claiming to be acting on the behalf of children."
So I think something that's really kind of important to draw about the story is sort of the unity, I guess, or unanimity. I don't know what the correct word would be there, but this kind of like almost connection between, I guess, like a bipartisanship effort, right? This is a thing that both sides of the aisle are coming together on, with Grindr definitely being more on like the left side of the aisle as opposed to the Michigan representative and Utah senator. But it's a really, really interesting thing to see kind of these efforts happening, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think Grindr, as well as every other dating app, does have that issue of minors getting onto their app too soon and too early, and they have to make those efforts to try and fix it and address it. And I think this is smart, but I will say that I think that these kind of age verification things it's difficult to police at the end of the day. You know, with certain sites like, you know, adult films or pornography, as well as like apps like Grindr or other dating apps, you know, it's pretty easy to just kind of bypass these and skirt the kind of regulations and rules that are put into place. So I guess my biggest question to draw from this is how is this even going to really be policed? Like, is there any kind of actual action that can be taken to really prevent things like, you know, minors from joining social, like apps like that, dating apps like Grindr and...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess a lot of talk about this age verification and like concern about it stems from, well, like, what are we using to verify age? Are people going to have to present their IDs in order to install certain apps on their phone or make accounts? Or are we going to have to use like face verification and sort of like the app determines what they think your age is and if you're old enough to use the app? And I know there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily comfortable with these kind of measures being taken. But specifically for sort of like dating apps. I don't know if there's necessarily another solution, because I feel like it's very important to protect both minors who might be trying to use the app too early, and also adults on the app that might unknowingly be talking to people that are lying about their age. I don't know if there's really another way to sort of protect everybody involved except for age verification like this. But I think it's definitely kind of scary to think that these measures could be extended to other apps such as social media, and what if we need IDs to have a social media account now?
I've seen some of this this age verification stuff popping up in the UK. We've seen sites, adult film sites, require an age verification system. Some of it, I believe, is through AI, like you were talking about, face recognition, not necessarily putting in like a photo of your ID, but just a picture of your face, and an AI will supposedly accurately determine how old you are. But people are already bypassing that. People are already bypassing that, showing pictures of people that aren't them, showing pictures of just looking up old man and just showing that face, or uploading that photo, because sometimes you're allowed to just upload a photo of yourself instead of taking a fresh one. And there's always going to be a way to bypass this. Social media apps now, and like, I know a lot of video game platforms ask for your age. I've been lying about that since I was 7 years old. Steam thinks I was born in 1992 when I was born in 2006. So I think really the question isn't so much, the issue of this isn't like, oh, this will lead to censorship. The issue is that this isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
The European Union Court Justice has just ruled that all EU member states must recognize same-sex marriages that are lawfully conducted in EU countries between the two EU citizens, regardless of the legality of the marriage in their home country. This decision comes after Polish authorities refused to transcribe a Polish same-sex couple's marriage certificate that they received when living in Germany in 2018. Polish law does not permit same-sex marriages or civil partnerships, and the Polish Administrative Supreme Court referred the couple to the EU Court of Justice after they challenged the refusal. While the court clarified that the ruling does not require member states to legalize same-sex marriage in their national laws, they stated the refusal to recognize a marriage certificate from another member state, quote, infringes not only on the freedom to move and reside, but also the fundamental right to respect for private and family life, end quote. Yeah, I think it's important to point out that this kind of gives queer couples, same-sex couples in the EU a way to kind of have access to marriage, even if their country doesn't allow it. If they have the financial means to move to another country and get married within there and then move back, they can get married, and that's a really big step, especially when we see a global trend in not supporting LGBTQ identities and rights.
Well, it just makes me think about even the United States and how, if Obergefell versus Hodges were to be overturned, how there would be almost a patchwork of states that respect versus don't respect marriage. And that was a huge issue prior to same-sex marriage being legalized in the United States, in how do states that, prohibit same-sex marriages and civil partnerships, do they respect marriages that are performed in other states?
This past week, children's video game Roblox has been banned in Russia, with the Russian government claiming the game promotes LGBT propaganda, as well as threatening the younger generation's, quote, spiritual and moral development. Since 2013, the nation has banned anything they deem to be LGBT propaganda, and cracked down even further on the ban in 2023 when their Supreme Court defined the, quote, international public LGBT movement to be a terrorist organization. This ban prohibits pro-LGBT speech, rainbow imagery, and organizations such as the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which was officially banned from the country in April of this year. The Russian government has had Roblox on their radar for quite some time now. Back in July, Russian press services disabled several in-game features that, quote, depicted LGBT characters and attributes of the LGBT community, end quote. However, the government has now decided that despite disabling these features, the game still contains an unacceptable amount of LGBT propaganda and has to be banned entirely.
When we look into social media and game spaces like this, we often see communities formed, and that can be the only space where somebody feels accepted and included. So when a government kind of just gets rid of even the opportunity for these to form and kind of gets rid of any representation, it can be a really harmful thing. We see suicide rates increase, we see self-harm rates increase, and when there's not community, there's not kind of that safety net.
Something that is really interesting to me is that Russia has not only banned Roblox, but also calls through Apple FaceTime and Snapchat, claiming that terrorist activities have been carried out through both of these applications. I would love to know what kind of terrorist activities are being carried out through a Snapchat call. That's very interesting to me, and I couldn't really find any concrete examples of these terrorist activities that were being carried out. But overall, like Riley said, I feel like a lot of these applications provide a safe space for kids that honestly don't find representation anywhere else, especially in a country like Russia where LGBT people are criminalized and there's so little outlet for them to express themselves or see themselves represented at all. So I think it's really sad because Roblox is something I grew up on and a place I never thought of it as like radicalizing me in any way or influencing me in any way. It was just something fun for me to do and something for me to connect with my friends on. So it's very sad that it's been taken away from these kids.
Russia will do whatever it needs to do in order to protect its kind of ruling party. You know, it will do what it needs to protect the president of Russia. And the LGBTQ plus movement and the LGBTQ plus people, I guess, community is a really easy scapegoat. So if that means banning social media platforms and, you know, FaceTime and, Snapchat and all these like random little things in order to kind of continue to protect the kind of regime in Russia, then they'll do what they need to do. You know what I mean? It's obviously crazy because I would agree. I've been on Roblox for so many years and I've never once thought that I was radicalized by playing, work in a pizza shop or Dress to Impress. But you know, it just speaks to how authoritarian regimes and how dictators will do what they need to do in order to protect their government and protect their ability to govern. And it's a common thing that we've seen across the world in countries banning social media. We saw it with Nepal during their Gen Z protest to overthrow the prime minister. They banned social media for a while and ended up having to re-allow social media platforms back out into the world because there were so much anger and hatred built up around the decision to do that, right? It's just a kind of another carbon copy example of countries doing things that are bad, but justifying it for some mundane or outright crazy reason.
Next up, we have our entertainment and history reports with Summer Savaria and Camryn Bowden.
Sarah Paulson, star of American Horror Story and Ratched, has been honored with her own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on December 2nd. Her star was presented to her alongside speeches from her Studio 60 on Sunset Strip co-star Amanda Peet and her longtime partner, Holland Taylor. Holland concluded her speech saying, quote, "Sometimes it's hard to believe she's an actress. She breaks the mold, throws assumptions out the window, does it her way. She will always surprise us. Hollywood does well to honor her, and just in case she doesn't know it, she is a permanent, shining star on my street. I love you, darling." On November 23rd of this year, 6 wrestlers stepped into the ring as a part of a British LDN wrestling event called The Final End of the Feud, one of which was Peter Thornley, known for his ring name Kendo Nagasaki, who stepped in the ring at the age of 84. Thornley stepped in the ring in order to break a Guinness World Record for oldest man to wrestle in a pro match worldwide. Thornley has competed as Kendo Nagasaki since 1964, yet the public didn't know Thornley was behind the character until a 2002 lawsuit linked the two. Thornley then would go on to write a memoir speaking about the character of Nagasaki, in which he also came out as bisexual. He later came out as gay, saying, "Bisexuality is forced on my type of person." Thornley then spoke on BBC Radio Stoke in 2024, quote, "My bisexuality, I'd been pushed into that sort of thing. If it had been now, I'd be gay. I wouldn't be bisexual." 2026 is looking to be a big year when it comes to queer films. Here are some of the many LGBTQ plus movies to look out for in the new year. Netflix's hit YA series Heartstopper will be receiving a feature-length film in place of a 4th and final season. Heartstopper Forever will be based on the 6th installment of Alice Osman's webcomic of the same name, and its release date is to be announced at time of recording. Diablo Cody, filmmaker responsible for Jennifer's Body, is producing an adaptation of the play of The Woman Came the Beginning of Sin and Through Her We All Die. The film will star many rising queer stars, including Alexandra Shipp, Victoria Pedretti, and Lily Reinhart. The film, titled Forbidden Fruits, will debut in theaters April 9th. Spring of next year will also have A24's next film, Mother Mary, debut on the silver screen. The film stars Anne Hathaway as a troubled pop star in the throes of a situationship with her former confidant, played by Michaela Cole, with Jack Antonoff and Charlie XCX contributing music. Theaters next year are sure to be filled with queer voices in these and many more films next year. For your queerly informed entertainment break, I'm Summer Savaria.
This week in Queer Past, Henry Gerber founds the first gay rights organization in the U.S. On December 10, 1924, Gerber founded the Society for Human Rights, a nonprofit based out of Illinois that was dedicated to promoting awareness about gay rights ahead of the major gay rights movement. Gerber was a German immigrant and was inspired by the work of Magnus Hirschfeld, who created the Scientific Humanitarian Committee in Germany during the Weimar period. The organization created a publication for gay people called Friendship and Freedom, which would have likely been restricted from being shared due to the Comstock law at the time. Gerber also created plans for gay emancipation. The Society for Human Rights was eventually disbanded, with Gerber bankrupting himself to avoid prison, but its legacy and history within the LGBTQ+ community still stands as an important part in the evolution of our rights. For your queerly informed history lesson, I'm Camryn Bowden.
Thank you to Summer Savaria and Camryn Bowden for those reports.
Welcome to this week's Trans News Break.
The University of Oklahoma has put a transgender teaching assistant, Mel Kurth, on administrative leave after she gave a student a 0 for an essay that calls trans identities, quote, demonic.
The student, Samantha Folnecki, filed a religious discrimination complaint to the university and posted her essay on the OU chapter of Turning Point USA. Kurth responded to the discrimination allegations, defending the point deduction because, quote, posting a reaction paper that does not answer the questions for the assignment contradicts itself, heavily uses personal ideology over empirical evidence in a scientific class, and is at times offensive.
This incident has sparked debate on social media and has led to Folnecki's mother openly posting that she targeted Kurth because she's trans.
In recent weeks, readers of the BBC have noticed a trend in describing trans women as biologically male in their news coverage.
Notably, in the Graham Lineham harassment trial, victim Sophia Brooks was unnecessarily described as being, quote, born a biological male but identifying as woman.
The BBC Writing Style Guide attests that the writers only include necessary information in regard to gender identity, and when questioned about any changes, a spokesperson for the news outlet claimed there had been no additional updates to the writing policies displayed on their website.
The U.S. Department of Justice has announced that it intends to remove standards within the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which are in place for the protection of incarcerated LGBTQ+ people.
These standards have been in effect since the Obama administration in 2012, and their potential removal is raising concern for the safety of an already at-risk group, as 35% of transgender inmates held in U.S. prisons have been sexually assaulted within their first year of their sentence.
This move by the Trump administration will prevent investigators in incident reviews to cite gender identity as a reason for harassment within the prison system and would rescind mandated screenings for intersex and transgender inmates to prevent sexual abuse within a facility.
Leanne Withrow, who was a soldier for the National Guard from 2010 to 2023 and now works as a civilian employee for their State Family Programs Office, is suing the Trump administration in a class action lawsuit out of the District of Columbia due to the bathroom ban that prevents her, as a trans woman, from using the restroom while at work.
Withrow was a widely decorated soldier during her time of service and has stated that she became part of the National Guard because she wanted to give back to the U.S. and her community and because her family has always been involved with the military.
The signing of the executive order by President Trump in January of this year that mandates the state buildings only recognize two sexes in public restrooms prevents Withrow from being able to use the restroom and forces her to restrict eating and drinking during the workday. She maintains that she is passionate about fighting for what's right and is hopeful for a future in which she will be treated equally.
Pastor Philippa Phaneuf has come out to her congregation as a trans woman following Sunday morning worship at the North Chile United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York.
Sporting a rainbow stole, she stated, quote, "I'm not becoming a woman, I'm giving up pretending to be a man." Phaneuf shared that she had been receiving hormone replacement therapy for 3 months and discussed what would change and what would remain the same during her transition.
She emphasized her commitment to prioritizing belonging and togetherness and expressed hope that our church may be known within the community as a safer space. She has largely been accepted and encourages members of her congregation to remember that they stand for community, love, and ministry.
Japan is seeing a rise in trans inclusivity within academia, as there are now 6 women's universities who are accepting transgender students, 2 of which are public universities.
Fukuoka's Women University has also announced over the summer that they plan to start accepting transgender students by the 2029 academic year.
These decisions come despite a notable step backwards in the country with inclusivity, following the court ruling on November 28th of this year that found the ban of same-sex marriage to be constitutional within the country. The story about Samantha Fulnecki at the University of Oklahoma has been the one I've been seeing a lot about this past week, and it's absolutely appalling to me. I've read the essay. I don't think this essay would have gotten a good grade in the middle school classroom. It was abhorrent. That is not college level writing whatsoever. There were 0 citations. She didn't follow the prompt, and honestly, she deserved a 0. And I've also read the comments that the trans TA made on her paper, and those were the most thoughtful, respectful, insightful comments that she could have given. She stated very clearly why Samantha got a 0 on this essay. So this was 100% targeting this TA for being trans, and I think it's absolutely cowardly, and shame on the Oklahoma University administration for putting this TA on leave for this. It's truly embarrassing, and it makes me trust the University of Oklahoma as an institution less, and respect them a lot less for this decision to bend to the whims of this student rather than sticking up for academic integrity.
I think another story that's really, really disgusting and abhorrent is this DOJ story coming out of the potential removal of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. There is so many instances, cases, stories of trans women, of trans people being sexually assaulted in prisons, and the very minimal, I guess, repercussions and standards and boundaries and barriers that have been put in place, which, again, are very minimal as is right now, are looking like they could potentially be taken away completely for trans people. And that is devastating, because there are a lot of people in the prison system who do experience sexual assault and rape and sexual harassment, and their stories are left usually pretty untold, or left, very quiet, I guess. And it's because people don't view prisoners who are our neighbors, our fellow Americans, our friends, as real human beings. When you commit a crime and you go to prison, you're viewed as this otherness. You know what I mean?
Before we end off our show, here's a special interview with WRHU's Juliana Calção.
On November 26th, the New York Times published a story about the Trump administration no longer recognizing World AIDS Day. The story included that the State Department told employees not to promote the commemoration and to not use government funds in relation to World AIDS Day. Should I do that again?
Yeah, one more time.
Okay. On November 26th, the New York Times published a story about the Trump administration no longer recognizing World AIDS Day. The story included that the State Department told employees not to promote the commemoration and not to use government funds in relation to World AIDS Day. WRHU's Juliana Calção spoke to Professor Lisa Dresner, an LGBTQ studies lecturer and expert on the matter at Hofstra University, who started by discussing what World AIDS Day is.
World AIDS Day is a commemoration of the AIDS crisis and a sort of recommitment to battling HIV and AIDS that was originally started by the World Health Organization in 1988. It's December 1st of every year.
What does this commemoration mean for loved ones affected and the LGBTQ plus community in general?
I think that it's, a reminder that, people still do care about people who are affected by AIDS. And, you're right to bring up loved ones, right? Like an AIDS diagnosis still affects the whole family today. Now, at the height of the HIV AIDS crisis, in the 1980s, when there were no antiretroviral drugs available, it really affected people's loved ones a great deal. Many people at that time who got AIDS were rejected by their families for being gay and or for having contracted AIDS. Um, and so they were dependent on friends and, significant others to take care of them. And, some friends and significant others really stepped up, but it was a huge amount of caregiving. It's a very devastating illness if it's not treated. And, aside from being fatal, it just requires a great deal of caregiving work. And some people stepped up and were wonderful. And a lot of bonds were made in the LGBTQI plus community between, say, lesbians who had a much lower incidence of the disease and gay men who had a much higher incidence. So some bonds were strengthened, but a lot of bonds were broken. Some people just couldn't handle taking care of their loved ones who were so, so sick, and a lot of people died abandoned. So, it's sort of it's a reminder this really does affect lots of people and not just the people who are sick. Thank goodness, many, many more people in the world now have access to effective medication. That means that AIDS is no longer a death sentence. But then some people don't have access to that medication, and they still are suffering just in the ways that people suffered in the 1980s when they were not able to get treatment.
Why was the AIDS pandemic so significant?
First of all, it was significant in the sense that at the beginning, we didn't really know what caused it. There were a lot of theories about what might cause it. Experts did notice that there was an uptick in sort of these mysterious conditions that led to death, these mysterious pneumonias that seemed to indicate that people's immune systems were destroyed, but they didn't know what was destroying their immune systems. Like usually you could pinpoint some other cause that would destroy your immune system, and they couldn't figure it out for a while. And then they noticed that it seemed to be among a lot of gay men, although not exclusively. Originally, AIDS was called sort of gay cancer while they were trying to figure it out. They weren't sure how it spread. As we know now, it spreads primarily from blood contact, right, or contact with saliva and blood mixing. Not so much saliva to saliva, but there was a point where people really didn't know how it spread. People didn't know, could you hug somebody with AIDS? During the 1980s, Princess Diana, King Charles's first wife, made a big splash by going into hospitals and hugging AIDS patients and shaking hands with AIDS patients without wearing gloves and trying to kind of reassure the public that it wasn't catching through casual contact. But that was not entirely clear at the very beginning of the crisis. So it was sort of scary in the sense that we didn't know how it spread. It was also important in the sense that it gave people who did not like folks who were in the LGBTQIA plus community sort of an excuse to discriminate. But that discrimination was not limited to people in the community. There was a young boy who was a hemophiliac who had gotten AIDS through a blood transfusion, as many people who were not part of the community did get AIDS in that way. They contracted HIV, and which developed into AIDS. A young man named Ryan White, and the folks in his town didn't want him going to school with other kids. They were afraid that he was going to give the other kids AIDS. And so that was not uncommon for it to be socially devastating to the person who was diagnosed, as well as physically devastating.
Building off of that last question, in your expert opinion, is it still significant and why?
Well, it's symbolically concerning. The first Trump administration didn't do that. They celebrated it like all the other presidents since George W. Bush. George W. Bush was actually the first president to honor that publicly. He was also the president who developed our PEPFAR program, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. He and his wife had gotten very interested in trying to improve conditions in Africa. And because there was a serious AIDS crisis in Africa, that's one of the areas in which they put their energy. So up to this point, all US presidents in every year of their administration, as far as I know, have honored World AIDS Day. However, I will say that really the important thing is about where you put your money. And that's a more concerning issue. This second Trump administration as opposed to the first Trump administration, made a decision early in the administration to cut off funds to U.S. aid. I think it's the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is sort of the U.S.'s charitable arm overseas. And it does us a lot of political good too. It's not like we're just giving charity just because we're nice, although that would be a good thing. But also it buys us a lot of political capital to help out other areas of the world. And they stopped humanitarian aid and all aid and sort of reviewed it for a period early this year. And that PEPFAR program was stopped. And although it was restarted, there were some exceptions made reasonably quickly for medical aid. A lot of the programs that we were funding didn't restart. About half of them did not restart, the ones that were working on HIV prevention and treatment. So that's a big blow across the world to people who were getting treatment and prevention resources, and now they're not. Wow. So that, I would say, is actually much more important than whether the administration, technically recognizes World AIDS Day or not. To me, it's about more like, where do you put your resources?
Final question. Is the Trump administration's choice to not commemorate and instead ignore World AIDS Day concerning to you?
Not with the people in charge in the second Trump administration, but it is very disappointing to me.
Thank you to Professor Lisa Dresner and WRHU's Juliana Calção for that interview. Thank you for tuning in to Queerly Informed this week, here on 88.7 Radio Hofstra University, Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thank you to the entire Queerly Informed team for your work on this week's edition.
Join us back here next week to hear the latest in queer news, as well as commentary from our group of LGBTQ reporters.
As always, if you have any suggestions for stories or content that you would like to hear, send them our way through email at queerlyinformedwrhu@gmail.com.
Thank you again to our entertainment reporter today, Summer Savaria, our historian Camryn Bowden, and WRHU's Juliana Calção for their work on today's show.
For Queerly Informed, I'm Bryana Neff.
And I'm Riley Horvath.
Thank you for tuning in.